Well, hello. I want to thank everyone for tuning in as always. I'm Melissa, and I'm joined today by the co authors of Don't Tell the President, Jean Becker and Tom Collimore. For those of you who watch these events, we've done a handful with Jean in the past, so it's really great to have her back and to be joined by the co author of this book. I've never done presidential advance or vice presidential advance, so I can't equate my stories to our two authors, but I do run the events here at the Reagan Library, and so I sort of know a lot of these behind the scenes, and I know a lot of these people. So for me, reading the book was so fascinating because it was both sort of a walk down memory lane as well as sort of, a peek behind the curtain of those of you who've served at the White House. So I'm just going to start by saying thank you for writing it. It was such a great read. And I'm going to start, most of my questions will be addressed to both of you, but I'm going to start by sort of singling out you both by starting with origin stories. So, Tom, because I've never spoken to you before, I'm reading your story. How does a college student end up driving the RV that George H.W. Bush was campaigning in? Like, how does that even happen?
It's a little scary to contemplate, isn't it? Well, the and as we call him, Ambassador Bush arrived in Connecticut, desperate to win the primary of one of his five home states, uh, because it was down to he and Governor Reagan basically to get the nomination in 1980. And we decided he needed to run in Connecticut like he was running for governor and just stump all over the state. And Connecticut's not that big a place, so you needed a vehicle. So we went rented this Winnebago, and the Secret Service had joined him literally like 3 days before he arrived in Connecticut for the primary. And they looked at the Winnebago and said, "No, we're not doing that." And everyone else involved in the campaign said, "Yes, we are. And this young man is going to drive it because he's an expert." And they drilled me and said, "Well, what do you know about?" "Oh, yes, no, I'm all prepared." And of course, I can tell now I'd never driven the thing anywhere before. And it was quite an adventure. And as I say in the book, we're pulling out of the first parking lot, and there's an agent in the right seat next to me, and he whispers into his microphone, "So far, so good." Gave me a lot of confidence, but we made it through the week without denting anything or hurting anyone. It was quite an experience.
And as you're driving it, are you feeling like you're a part of history, or is it just like you're in the moment and you're just making sure you're not crashing?
Oh, it's interesting. I'd sort of been his trip planner for visits for the preceding couple of years, and so I knew him a little bit, and I knew the staff. But that week, because the campaign was on the line, we had a lot of VIPs traipsing through and joining us on the Winnebago, and including, eventually Secretary Nick Brady and Secretary Mac Baldrige was the state chairman, and Secretary James Baker showed up at one point. So, there were a lot of, titans, eventual titans that were coming in. And yes, it made it feel like history. And there was this old speechwriter, Gene will remember him, Vic Gold, who actually helped President Bush with his campaign autobiography in 1988. And he went back to the Rockefeller and Nixon days. And Vic Gold came on and he announced that he was in charge. And this is exactly what uh, Bush should say. And by about, I don't know, the third hour of that, Baldrige had left him behind at a rest stop. Enough of that. So there was a lot of sort of drama at a higher level that I was observing. It was kind of interesting.
Now, Jean, I know you have shared this with me before, but for those who haven't seen our previous conversations, you were a reporter for USA Today. And then essentially, I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but wake up one day and you're helping do advance for Laura Bush. So, how does that path happen?
Well, actually, for Barbara Bush.
Oh, Barbara Bush,
You're
sorry.
one. You're
Yes, of
one
course.
first lady off. No.
Yes.
So I covered the 1988 election for USA Today. I was part of the big election team, and that was the year that Vice President Bush was a Republican nominee. Governor Dukakis of Massachusetts was a Democrat. One of my duties that fall is we convinced Barbara Bush and Kitty Dukakis to write a weekly column for us, and I was their editor. So I got to know both of those women very, very well. And when the election was over, I was having lunch with Susan Porter Rose, Mrs. Bush's chief of staff. And she literally, this is how this happened. She was telling me that Marlon Fitzwater had told her that she needed to hire someone with journalism experience and the first lady's press office. The people she'd hired two people, and they both had backgrounds in PR and marketing. And he had started to chewed her out and said, "You need someone who understands how these people work." And she offered me the job on the spot. And it
Mm.
actually took me a couple weeks to say yes, Melissa. It was going to be a big pay cut. I loved my job at USA Today. I went home for Thanksgiving. My dad, the Missouri farmer who never graduated from high school, but was one of the smartest people I knew, he looked at me and he said, "Let me get this straight. You've been offered a job to work for the First Lady of the United States, and your office would be in the White House, and you're thinking about it. What the hell's wrong with you?" And I will just add one quick thing. I thought my job as deputy press secretary would be to tell reporters the names of the Bush grandkids and their ages and give out Mrs. Bush's chocolate chip cookie recipe. In the first week, I'm in New York advancing her to a trip to a literacy center. I'd never heard the word
Right.
advance. I didn't know what it
Right.
meant. And after our first meeting, the Secret Service advance agent knocked on my hotel room door. And when I opened it, he said, "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" No, I don't.
Well,
So it was an interesting start.
that's actually the perfect segue to my next question. It's for either of you, but in your book, well, so first of all, for those who haven't read it yet, it's really talking about the advanced men and the advanced women who helped presidents and vice presidents and first ladies do the types of events they needed to do. But in your book, you actually share where the word advanced man came from. So can you share that?
Go
Mr.
ahead, Jane.
Collmore,
Well,
all
I,
yours.
well, we were very fortunate that John Meacham agreed to write the foreword for the book, and John is a good friend to both of us, and obviously a wordsmith beyond any of the three of us could hope to achieve. Um, he starts by naming John the Baptist as the first advanced man, so that gives us a pretty good arc of history, doesn't it? And then he takes us through the days of the circus and barnstorming and show business and all of that, and eventually gets to uh, the advance of for Eisenhower and then Nixon and the eventual I'm sorry, Nixon, well, Nixon versus Kennedy, but Kennedy, and then the eventual uh, sort of establishment of advance as a profession, if you will. And we try to do some of that in the story. Ron Walker was a legendary advance man. He did a lot of work for President Reagan, including running his 1984 convention. A lot of folks will remember. But Ron was asked by President Nixon to establish the first office of advance in the White House. And his wife, who passed away a couple of years ago, Anne, wrote an essay in the book about how that came about. So it's an interesting tale.
Yeah. Now, this may not be a fair question, but is there a story in your book that you considered actually not printing because it almost seemed too unbelievable?
You know what? Yes, there were a number of them, and I know Tom is not going to be surprised that I'm going to tell the Senator Bob Dole story. And I think if we hadn't found the photo to go with this story, it would still be unbelievable. It's a story of Senator Dole campaigning for president. And one of the great things about the story, it shows how important advance is. Anyway, a friend of his, he's on his way to Florida, and a friend of his called him on the plane and said, "You've got to go to this construction zone. Universal Studios is building a theme park, and it would be a great place for you to talk about the importance of jobs, the economy. This theme park is going to be huge. It's just the perfect place for you to do it." And he wanted him to do it that afternoon. And his head of advance was with him on the plane and said, "No, no, 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 Senator Dole, let the advance team go, check it out, tell them you'll come tomorrow or even 2 days." He said, "No, I'm going today." Well, he got there, Melissa, and it was a construction site. There were like two bulldozers moving dirt, and the only people there to greet him were the following Universal characters in full costume: Charlie Chaplin, Woody Woodpecker, Frankenstein, Mae West. who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting
Well, the
somebody.
the photo is in the book.
The photos in the book,
Yeah.
and you know, you can't make that up. It was a disastrous event. There was nobody else there. There was, except for the press, who of course is beyond thrilled. And Senator Dole had a great sense of humor, and he managed to quip to the press, I wanted to bring you here to introduce you to some people I'm thinking about putting in my cabinet, which of course is very funny. And what makes it even funnier or not is he fired all of his top campaign people later that day. And the story, the photo that ran with that story was that photo of him with Woody Woodpecker, Charlie Chaplin, you know, Frankenstein's like, oh boy. Anyway, it's a funny story. It's unbelievable, but it's a great story that shows, yeah, this is why you got to do advance.
I should point out that story is written by Mike Lake, who is an old Reagan hand and the son of Jim Lake, of course, a
Yeah, he
close
is.
advisor to the president.
Both good men. So, one of the things I was thinking about a lot as I was reading your stories is, I've been lucky. I've been doing advance, and again, just for the Reagan Library, but I've been doing advance in the 2000s. You were doing it in the 80s. There were no cell phones, there were no computers, there was no internet, there was no email. Technology has really changed the way advance works, at least perhaps the speed of which how advance works. I don't mean to sound like you're on dinosaurs, walking backwards in the snow barefoot, but how were you advancing back then when the technology was so limited?
You know, Melissa, that's a great question because the difference, and we touch on it a little bit in our own forwards and beginnings of the book, but the change in technology has been a game changer, obviously. And there's one story in the book about President Clinton going to address a joint session of Congress early in his presidency to make his big pitch on healthcare. And literally, he starts giving the speech and realizes that the wrong speech has been loaded into the teleprompter. And he turns to Vice President Gore and says, it's the wrong speech. Now, Clinton was such a good speaker that he then turned around and spoke literally for 12 to 15 minutes as if the right speech was there, which is pretty remarkable. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, a young White House aide named George Stephanopoulos is trying to get the teleprompter operator, along with Andrew Friendly, to load the proper speech and get him back to where it ought to be. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, that happened a couple of times slightly differently with Vice President Bush running for president in 1988. There was one time we got to Notre Dame. He was giving a big speech in the basketball arena, and he had made changes to the speech on the airplane, but we went from the airplane right to the speech site. And literally, I am behind the curtain changing the speech with the operator, trying to stay ahead of where he is in the text. I mean, I'm editing about 3 pages ahead of where he's speaking, and that's a high stress moment. But it relates to your technology question because now, of course, you would make changes to a speech and it's downloaded and sent to the cloud and sent to the event site, no problem. Back in the day, you didn't change much because you didn't have the technology to change much. And if you're campaigning, and they're flexible, you'd land at an airport, you'd have to wait to go inside and get a landline and a fax so that they could then tell us where you're going next. We wouldn't know where we're going on the next flight. And we'd be telling the, yeah, anyway, yes, big change.
Melissa, my story illustrates the importance how cell phones was a huge game changer for advanced people. Uh, I'm in Hawaii, very excited to be in Hawaii. The First Lady of the United States is coming to Hawaii to do some events, and I was the lucky one who got to advance it. And I'm driving back to my hotel on a Sunday afternoon. She's leaving the next day to fly to Hawaii. And I realized I needed to call my boss to go over some challenges, some decisions we needed to make. And I realized because of the time change, I did not have time to get back to my hotel to call her because it was a little bit of I was over an hour away. So I stopped at a payphone. And for those of you who are of a certain age, you may have to Google what a payphone is. But I found a payphone, a standalone, a typical payphone, box. at a strip mall. And I go in and I call her, and we're going over some changes when this motorcycle gang pulls up right outside the payphone, and they're revving their motors or being really, really loud. So I said to my boss, hold on just one moment. And I poked my head out, and I think very politely, I said, I'm actually on a work call. Would you guys mind going to the other side of the strip mall? And most of them, I thought all of them, drove away. I get back on the phone, and then I hear sort of this funny noise, and I have my back to the door. I'm like, what's going on? And I turned around. Two of them are peeing into the phone booth onto
Oh,
me.
oh my
I said
God.
to Susan, yeah, I need to call you back. And yeah, that's a little graphic story, but that talk about what a game changer cell phones are today. That you don't have to stop at a payphone at a strip mall to call in your schedule
Oh my
changes.
God. And have exact change. And
Yeah,
like, that's
exactly.
crazy.
I'm pretty sure I called collect.
That I've never heard that story. That's a great story.
There's a
Um,
more, I will point out, we have a better payphone story in the book, which is a little less graphic. Sorry, Jean. But on March 30th, 1981, just after President Reagan was shot, David Prosperi went running into the Capitol Hilton, found a payphone, called the press office so that he could tell Larry Speaks what had happened. But by luck, there was one free. There were all these people. He talks about it, how they were all occupied. No one had any idea what had happened, but he got a free payphone and was able to communicate that way.
yeah, you can't even find payphones anymore. So let's talk about the process of the book. So again, it's stories or essays submitted by advanced people. So I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes, both. But was it, for the most part, you reaching out to individual staff members or advanced members, asking them for stories, or as you began the process, did the word spread and now people were calling you to be included? How did this all sort of come together?
It was a little bit of both. We of course knew the George H.W. Bush advance world very well. And people like Brian Montgomery, who was both a 41 advance person, but then was head of advance for George W. Bush. Brian was very, very helpful in putting us in touch with a lot of George W. advance people. But the people who saved our life with all the other presidents, first of all, it has stories, everybody from LBJ through President Obama. And we love that. It's a very bipartisan book. And we purposely did not seek out President Biden or President Obama's stories because it's too soon. These stories are better told when they're far in the rearview mirror. Anyway, who saved our life were the presidential libraries,
Mm.
because we called the heads of all the library foundations, all of whom we know. I know all of them. Tom, I think, knows all of them. And they're the ones, people like Joanne Drake, people like Stephanie Street at the Clinton Library, Mark Updegrove at the LBJ Library. I had to find the person at the Ford Library. Anyway, they were tremendous. The Carter Library, they're the ones who then did the call out for us in the other presidents' worlds. And yeah, and also word also started getting around. And one of my favorite emails I got was from former head of the CIA and Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates. And Bob Gates says, Gene, I have stories for
Oh.
your advance book. He did pre-advance in the Carter and Ford administrations as a member of the National Security Council.
Mm.
And he said, do you want my stories? And Tom and I were, yes, yeah, of course, we would like your stories.
He's such a gracious man. So when I was prepping for this event, I sort of, laid out all of my questions. And one of my questions was going to be about sort of like the biggest lesson you each learned while working at the White House. But then, in speaking with some people, I had a better way to ask the question. So we're actually going to ask that you guys watch this short video.
Hi, Gene. Hi, Tom. It's Michael Smirkanish. I'm like gum on your shoe. You just can't get rid of me. But my friend Melissa Giller has given me an opportunity to ask you one more question. And there was something I failed to ask, and it's this. Lessons learned from advance that help you in life. And I'm motivated to ask this because David Anderson, who advanced for 41 and 43, has a section in the book that really resonated with me. I find that the preparation skills, hopefully the people skills, the things you learn when you're doing advance, serve you well for the rest of life. Can you comment on that? See ya.
Tom, do
He
you want to go first?
well, Michael's in the book obviously because
He is.
he he did advance as a college guy just like I did, and I think like Michael, he can point to that experience. I certainly can, and say it helped mold me for success later in life. And I think the David Anderson essay, Gene and I have been going around and doing our shtick in a few places. And we've gotten into the habit of closing our sessions by talking about the essay because these are life lessons. And we also happen to think they channel some of the presidents that we've known and worked with over time. And they're just fundamental good things about life, about communicating and keeping strong relationships and being transparent and honest and respecting the people you're working for and all of that. So I would commend that last essay to any of our friends out there who want to read the book.
I would just add to that, and certainly learned this also from President Bush when I was his chief of staff in his post presidency. He used to quote Wayne Gretzky, who said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." And when you're out there on the road, you have to roll the dice, and you lose some and you win some, but you lose all of them, the shots you don't take. So definitely working at the White House, and then even working for him the rest of his life, it helped me be a big thinker. You got to think big, and you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but it's worth it.
Well, and your answer, Gene, ties right into my next question is that you both actually worked specifically for H.W. Bush. And so I wondered if you could each share the biggest lesson you learned from the president or vice president when you worked for him.
Well, for me, that's easy. He lived every day of his life putting himself in the other person's shoes and trying to be respectful of where they might be coming from and being compassionate, even if he disagreed vehemently with their position. He was a stickler for disagreeing in a agreeable manner, if you will, and I think he passed that on to the people around him, and he insisted on that kind of behavior from the people representing him.
I think I talked about this the last time you and I had a conversation, Melissa, but it's worth repeating. His friendship with Bill Clinton is such a great lesson for all of us. The man who robbed him of the second term of his presidency in 1992 was a tough campaign. But by the time President Bush died, they were best friends. I'm convinced that President Bush is the father that Bill Clinton never had. And
Mm.
watching that relationship, that friendship develop, but that was classic President Bush. He didn't hold grudges. He had a knack for finding the best in everybody. And
Mhm.
sometimes I need to work harder at that. But I think that's one of the most important things I learned from him.
I love that. And I apologize if I get this wrong, so please correct me. But the best way to learn more is one of Gene's previous books. I believe it's called When Character Counts. Is that the right title?
It's called very close. Character matters.
Character Matters. And
Character
that
matters.
book is it just it for those of us who didn't know George H.W. Bush, it's such a great way to learn him more intimately. So I would recommend it. If either of you or both of you could go back and live those advanced years again, is there anything you would do differently?
It's a great question. That's the first person, you're the first person to ask that question.
Yay.
Good for you. Um, I'm going to have to think for a minute.
Okay.
Let me, I know there's lots of things I could have done better. Um, I think maybe just more appreciating it all happened so fast, and it was so complicated sometimes and a lot of travel. I sort of wish I could go back and be more in the moment.
Mm.
When I look back at the places I've been, I mean, as I said in the book, I once gave Princess Diana advice on whether Prince Harry and Prince William should go see Air Force One. And that just all seems surreal now. And at the time, I'm not sure I always lived in the moment as much as I should have. So that would be my advice for all the White House staffers and advanced people out there now. Don't forget to step back and appreciate. You may be working 18-hour days and it's crazy, but just appreciate where you are and what you're doing.
It's a great answer.
I'm not sure I can improve on that. I think that's spot on. I learned as we were doing this because I worked closely with our advanced teams with a slightly different function and responsibility. And I learned when doing this that apparently a bunch of these folks were scared of me, and it made me sad that apparently in my youth, perhaps there was a bit of a gruff exterior as we were executing. So that's a good lesson, and hopefully things softened over time. But anyway.
Well, you know, in Tom's defense, because yes, one advanced person called me and said, "Why are you doing this book with Tom Cullimore? He hates all of us." Well, no, he didn't. But he was. Tom did for Vice President Bush what I did for former President Bush. President Bush, we were, I don't want to say muscle. We were the people who told people no. We were the people who had to tell people, no, you're not going to do that. And because we were the bad cop, good cop, bad cop. And Tom was the bad cop during those years. And I was a bad cop. I know a whole bunch of people, Tom, who don't like me from the post presidential years that I had to say, yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
Well, and there are a handful of stories in your book where the various advanced people writing them would tell the story of how they had to go in and basically tell wherever they were advancing, that those countries or those locations had all the ideas of how the presidential visit was going to go. And no, that's not at all how the presidential visit's going to go. So it's a tough job. What is a misconception, do you think, that people might have about presidential travel?
I think people probably think it's pretty, you know, luxurious. It's a one big long boondoggle, right? And the reality is that it's a lot of hard work. Um, yeah, you go to a lot of amazing places, but you don't really see them. My kids say, "Well, you've been to this country or that country." Yeah, but it doesn't really count. We landed at an Air Force base and we went to a palace or a hotel and we had a bunch of meetings and we got back on the plane and we went to the next place. So, it's not the glamour that some people might
Mhm.
ascribe to it.
I
But
love
but I will also I mean it sounds cheesy, but it's true. But it's also a high privilege and honor. And when you're overseas representing the United States, there's no really more honorable thing. And you've been on a long trip. What comes to mind is being in China for a week or so, and you get to the airport and you see that big, beautiful plane with United States of America emblazoned across it, and you feel like you got home. And you get on board that plane, and this amazing crew serves you a cheeseburger, and then you really feel like you're home.
I don't really have anything to add to that except to say Michael Smerconish addressed sort of the issue that Tom just brought up. He was in Brussels and he realized one night that he hadn't really seen or done anything. And it just had been, and so he looks across the street and sees this lovely, looked like a club or a restaurant. And he thought, well, I'm going to go over there and maybe have a nice dinner. And as it turns out, it was a brothel.
Oh,
You'll have to read the book to find out what happened after that.
that's right. I do remember that story. So we are now going to go to another advanced person who has a question for you. I will give you a little premonition that the question's a little bit similar to Michael's, but hopefully there's another answer there. And you both know her, Alix Mattingly.
Hello, Oh, Tom and Jean, what a fantastic, fun, fabulous book. And walk down memory lane for me and my 12 years working in the White House, along with you and so many others, and the many friendships made through that service. It really is, there's no greater honor than sitting in a seat on the windowsill of history like what we witnessed, both the policy triumphs and the logistical challenges. What an experience, and you've really wrapped it up in this book. Thank you. My question to you both is, amidst 24/7 work in the West Wing and the East Wing, what were the most impactful or powerful takeaways that you have from that experience?
First of all, how fun to see Alix, who, of course, has a great, great story in the book. I think her story's in the chapter called "The Day I Thought I Was Going to Be Fired,"
Mhm.
and we won't say anything more about it. Um, I think the biggest takeaway is for me, and I used to think that when I worked there, but even more so when I left. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, and my graduating high school class is 57 kids. I also grew up a Democrat, although
Mhm.
my dad would tell you that my dad was a Republican by the time he died. But the great thing about working at the White House is that door is really open to anybody in America. I don't want any young person out there to think, well, I'll never have that opportunity. Again, I grew up on a farm. My hometown was 315 people, and I made it to the White House. And not the day I graduated from high school. It took me a while to get there. But I just would like to encourage everybody, if that's what your dream is, if you would love to be involved in politics and government, go for it. That door is definitely open to you. So I think that's my biggest takeaway is it's a great adventure, and if it appeals to you, go for it.
That's a great answer.
That's a great answer, Gene. I'm not sure I can add a lot to it except sort of the advice I give my own children, which is, uh, work hard, be noticed, get in early, stay late, do the assignment nobody else wants. No, don't be virtual 4 days a week. I mean, come on. The pandemic's over. And you learn by meeting interesting people. You learn by building those relationships in your own network. And you learn by just putting your shoulder into it. And my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's
Well,
great
that's great advice. Yeah,
advice.
that's great
Yeah,
advice that a
that
lot
is
of people
great.
need to hear. A
That is
lot of people
great
need to hear.
advice. I feel I want to send that to about 50 people
Yeah.
right now. But one of
Exactly.
my favorite is get in early and stay late.
Yeah,
Just dig in. Anyway, that's great advice.
it is
I
great.
well, one other little
Yeah.
addendum to that too. That actually Secretary Baker said this to me more than once when I was talking to him about various people. He said, "Oh, and by the way, it helps to pick the right candidate."
But the we get asked a lot, how do you get involved? What do you do? And the answer is always the same: volunteer.
Yeah.
Volunteer for a campaign. And no, it may not be a presidential campaign right off, but we're in the midterm elections. I actually am hosting an event for a city council candidate at my house next week. But find somebody you believe in and get involved and volunteer. And the first thing you know, you might be an advanced person.
Yeah,
There you go.
that all such great advice. Now I know a lot of the Reagan advanced members, and they are all still. I mean, the Reagan presidency was 40 plus years ago, and they're all still such good friends. And it made me wonder: is that typical of advanced teams? It's because you're working so closely together that you create this bond. I guess that's my question.
Absolutely. You create a bond for life. And we saw that as we were reaching out. We'd call one person, all of a sudden we'd have five people, that story, And I mean Melissa, I don't know if you want me to talk about any stories actually in the book, but I think the Berlin Wall story is a great example of this. Because the director of advance for that iconic moment was Jim Hulie, who sadly passed away last week, and who helped us enormously with this book. And the lead advance for that trip was Andrew Littlefair, who, of course, is still very involved in the Reagan
Yeah, he's on
Foundation.
our
And
board. Yeah.
yeah, one of your many bosses, I guess, right?
Yes.
But yeah, we started picking away at that story, and it's first of all, it's a classic story about the difference between advance and good advance. Advance with people who have a vision and who understand the importance of conveying a message and you know going against the current to create a way of doing that. And in Berlin, the embassy and the host government, they wanted that speech to be in at the Reichstag or in a hotel ballroom. And Jim Hulie literally looked out the window and he saw the Brandenburg Gate and he said, "No, our guys got to give it right there." And that set in motion uh, doing it at the Brandenburg Gate and set in motion a really good speech becoming an historic moment, right? I mean, who doesn't now have that picture in their mind of the president saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall"? You wouldn't have that impression from a speech in a hotel ballroom, you
Right.
know. Um,
Right. Well, and that literally was my next question. So I'm actually going to ask it because maybe Jean has a answer to it. But my question was literally, and again, Tom, your answer was vision. But I was going to ask what separates a good advanced person from a great one.
Well, I think to the Berlin Wall story is a perfect example. You'd have to have vision, you have to be creative, but I think one of the traits you really need to have that some people don't have, you need to have to pivot.
Mm,
And, some people just get stuck in this is the way we're going to do it. And this is how we've always done it. We're not going to do it any other way. So, what a great testament to Jim Hooley, your host country, the Germans are saying, we're going to have it here in this room. And he's looking out the window and he said, no, we're not. And my guess is he handled it so diplomatically, and the Germans probably thought it was their idea by the time he got done convincing them of it. But what makes a great advanced person is again vision, but also the willingness to pivot and to say, you know what, we're going to start over. We're going to have it here and not there. And I think there's a couple stories in the book that illustrate that.
well, and to be clear, great vision and the ability to pivot is what all success, whether you're in advance or not in advance, right?
Right.
Those are great
Another
traits.
life lesson. Another life lesson.
And yes, another life lesson.
Yeah, yeah. Um, are there any items that you would bring with you on advanced trips that would save you over and over again?
Peanut butter crackers.
That's a great answer.
Um, I get good. Okay, I just thought of yes, good, comfortable walking shoes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
sometimes I would look at the women, this is an issue that men, for the most part, didn't have to deal with. But the women who felt wearing high heels was more important than comfort, yeah, they're probably, can't walk now. Comfortable walking shoes. Plus, and what I would say to staff in general, no one's looking at you. They're
Yeah.
looking at the principal. They're looking at the first lady or the president or the candidate. So, for God's sakes, put on your tennis shoes.
You and Joanne, it's frightening, Jean, how similar you and Joanne are. I mean, like before every large event, she gets up in front of all the staff, and that's the lecture she gives everybody. So it's very
Well,
funny.
she is definitely one of my chief of staff soul
Yes,
sisters. Joanne
yes, she
taught
is.
me a lot.
Yeah,
And one of the most important things she taught me, which I'll forever be grateful to, is she taught me how to do a presidential funeral.
yeah.
She and both President Ford and Joanne um, wrote me unbelievable memos about how to do a funeral, and I'll forever be grateful to them for that.
Now, a moment ago, we talked about the difference between what a good advanced person and a great advanced person. What would you say is the most underrated skill in advanced work?
The ability to work 18-hour days and energy we talked the things we talked about, like pivot and creativity. But I have to laugh every year, this time of year, and again in the fall. The people who complain about the time change
Oh.
as if this is the end of their life. And, this debate will go on about how difficult it is, and the suicide rate goes up. And oh my God, we jump forward an hour, and how can I cope with this? Advanced people, in fact, there's a story in the book, I think it's a President Clinton story, Tom, about an advanced team that went from Germany to Egypt, back to France. Advanced people can do 4 time zones in 2 days, and they're unbelievable, and maybe get 2 hours sleep a night. So they're underappreciated for how hard they work on very little sleep.
I would just add, I agree with that. And look, they're unsung heroes. That's what we came
Yes.
to believe as we did this. But I think they're also coalition builders. You can't be successful
Mm.
unless you can go into a strange place and get everybody moving in the same direction that you need them to move to make it happen. And that takes a certain relationship social skill, right? So
Hmm. Great point.
It
Great
is.
point.
Now, my next question, as I'm sort of reminding myself of it, makes me think of the answer you just gave me a few minutes ago of Jim Hulie and the Berlin Wall. But I was curious if either of you, either in your own personal advance work or in one of the stories of your book, if you ever worked a trip where as you were working it, you literally thought, we're making history here.
I probably did not. My own advanced trip. I hate to say this, mainly because I advanced Barbara Bush, the first lady, and they were more social events. And I mean, one of the stories I tell is about advancing her at the Florida State Fair. And unfortunately, she was judging a steer contest, and all the steers raised their tails and pooped through her entire speech. And it was, yes, a little graphic. Those are the kind of advanced trips I did. So
well,
I would say probably not for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
the one that sticks out for me, which is in the book, is a trip to Poland that then Vice President Bush took at President Reagan's request when Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain, communist dominated. But solidarity and Lech Walesa were beginning to emerge. And the whole purpose of the trip was to send a message to the people in Poland that America has your back and that we are with you in your aspiration for freedom. And it's kind of unusual for an advance team to be given permission to push the envelope as far as they were allowed to push the envelope against the sitting government and the secret police and others who didn't want Bush to succeed in conveying that message. But I'll save it for folks reading the essay in the book. But the advance team did a great job of sneaking Lech Walesa into Vice President Bush's guest house and into his limousine and putting him up at the top of a church steeple in front of 20,000 people that the host government did not want to be there and have see those two together. And it's a great story, and it made a difference. So.
So, just about 2 weeks ago, in preparation for this event, I had the idea of reaching out to a handful of advanced staffers to ask them to ask questions, right? You've heard from Michael, you've heard from Malik's. And one of the people I reached out to was Jim Hulie.
Mm.
And as we've mentioned in this broadcast, unfortunately, he passed away about a week ago, probably 5 days after I sent the email. So I obviously didn't get an answer. And we wanted to make sure that we spoke about him during this because he really he's one of a kind. And so what better way to sort of hear more about him than by another advancer, someone very near and dear to my heart. So let's now turn the screens and watch a message from Joanne Drake.
Hey, Jean and Tom. It's Joanne Drake out here in sunny California. First of all, congratulations on this book. I know it was years in the making, and I have just about 4 sentences in the book, but I'm so thrilled for you that it finally got published. I just wanted to jump in and offer 2 thoughts. The first one is, as we all know by now, we lost Jim Hulie in the last week or so. Of course, he had a number of pages in the book that talked about some interesting and fun events that he had participated in. But I'm just going to say right now, I don't think Jim Hulie ever got the credit that he should have. He was creative. He was a teacher. He was a mentor. He loved history. He had a great eye for what worked for Ronald Reagan, certainly. We're all going to miss him a lot. I know I speak for everyone in the advance office during that time, especially the women that worked there. Jim had respect for all of us. That was an interesting time for women in business, of course, and advance is not a traditional role where you find a lot of women, but he taught us things. He let us participate in things. He gave us a little bit of freedom, and it was extraordinary. So I just wanted to highlight his contributions to the world of advance. And lastly, Jean, I read the book and I noticed that you threw in a couple little tidbits from your own life, but I just wondered if maybe you could tell us your favorite advance story, something that was you were involved in, maybe not the first time that you did advance and you didn't know you were doing advance. We've all been there, by the way, but something that everybody who's listening can really understand and feel kind of deep in their bones. Good luck with everything. Come out and visit us when you're on one of your world tours. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I love seeing Joanne again. She's one of my mentors and one of my soul sisters, and what wonderful tribute to Jim Hulie. I hope he knows how much he was loved, because both Tom and I paid tribute to him in on email, and Tom on his Substack page. And oh my gosh, my email just blew up when I sent out that he had died, and I hope he knows how much he was loved. To answer Joanne's question, for me, it's an easy answer. I grew up very Catholic. In fact, my little brother is a Catholic priest. At the NATO summit was in Rome one year, and I got to advance Barbara Bush's visit to the Sistine Chapel, and probably more than any, well, definitely more than any other trip I did. I just remember standing in the Sistine Chapel, which of course is such a magical place, thinking, how did I get here? How lucky was I to be there? And I will add one funny thing. We didn't run into this very often. By the time I got to Rome, the president's advance team had already been there for a week because they had a much bigger job. And the lead advance pulled me aside and said, our site advance person at the Vatican has so irritated the Vatican with some of his demands, he is no longer allowed to go over there. So you will now have to advance the president's visit with John Paul II. And I, of course, was okay.
Wow. Put me in, coach.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in. I can do this.
Well,
So go ahead,
I
Tom.
could say I want to just say one more word about Jim if I can. I thought
Please.
Joanne's tribute was lovely and of course spot on. Jim was enormously helpful, as I said before, to us on this book, and he, without putting too fine a point on it, it was really helpful to have someone read some of the stories we had, who also had a world class, as Gene would say, black belt BS meter. And he he uh he did go through some of our submissions and say, yeah, that one might be a little overstated, or maybe this could be changed here. Maybe you should reach out to so and so and get a slightly different take on this. But I'm just saying he was so great about it.
He is
And
great.
I'm so glad that he has a fairly prominent voice in this book
Mhm.
because he certainly deserves that. He was a good friend. I will say there was a hot minute back in 2007 when I was asked to put together the beginnings of Fred Thompson's campaign for president. And I called Jim Hulie because I needed to have a great plan for a presidential campaign announcement down in Nashville for Thompson. And he met me for lunch literally the next day, and he signed up to write the plan and recruit the team. And it doesn't matter that I was fired 2 weeks later. He executed on that plan, and it's just the kind of guy he was, you know.
Yeah.
And anyway, we will miss him. He was
Yeah.
very.
When he passed, the Reagan Foundation, we posted a little tribute to him on our Facebook page, and the number of comments from people who worked with him and knew him,
Yeah.
he reached and touched a lot of people, including myself. My next question, I'm almost done here. My next question, and I think, Tom, you might have shared a story earlier on this topic, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring it back up. So we're airing on March 4th and of 2026. So we are just a few weeks away from the 45th anniversary of the assassination attempt on President Reagan's life. And I know your book covers some advanced stories relating to that day, and I just wondered if there's a story or two you could share.
Well, we obviously the assassination attempt has been well documented and spoken about in many ways, but I think the anniversary is certainly an opportunity to talk about the heroic role so many people played that day. We have a couple of staffers in the book telling their stories, um, and I think they do a nice job of that. We have an essay from Chase Untermeyer, who was with Vice President Bush in Texas that day, talking about his thought process and how singularly focused he was on two things, basically. One, was my friend okay? I mean, that was his number. You know, if you look at his handwritten notes on the cards on Air Force Two that day, that's his first notation is my friend okay? Um, and then obviously he was concerned about continuity of government and getting back to town, but he was also concerned about Mrs. Reagan and how she was doing, and all of that. So the famous thing of deciding, only the president lands on the South Lawn was was his instinct, right? Everybody said, no, no, we've got to go there. You got to get there and take charge. And he said, no, 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 that's not right. One, it just sends the wrong message to the world because it might imply that the president is worse off than he is. And secondly, it might bother Mrs. Reagan. I mean, I don't need to be shaking her windows at this sensitive time. So that tells you a little something about him, frankly. And but it was an amazing day. I remember it. I was right out of college, brand new Schedule C, with the Commerce Department, and it was a scary time. But anyway, I hope we do the day justice in the book.
I'll just add to that because I wasn't there. I was a newspaper reporter in my hometown in Missouri on that day. That was another place where Jim Hulie was extremely helpful to us. As we talked about before we got on this call, Melissa, we were Rick Ahern was the lead advance person that day, another legendary Reagan advance person. And sadly, he passed before we started working on this book. So we have a great story about the Ford assassination attempt, one of his assassination attempts, and we certainly wanted to do the one on President Reagan. And what Jim Hulie did for us was pull together, I don't know, Tom, maybe we have 5 little miniature essays from different people who were there in different roles. The press advance, Jim was there in another role. He actually was there, I think, with the Secretary of Labor.
Yeah, it was a labor speech, and
A
so
labor speech.
yeah,
He was, yeah. And so
right
when
on.
because we were wondering how we were going to do that day justice without Rick Ahern. And thanks to Jim Hulie, and Joanne also was very helpful. We have a series of essays, someone who was at the White House, and so it was a wonderful way to tell the story.
And speaking of Ronald Reagan, as we come toward the end, I wonder if either of you have, and I think I've asked you this before, Jean, in the past, but if either of you can share an interaction you might have had with Ronald Reagan.
Well, I can. Obviously I worked for Vice President Bush's campaign against him, but I came to town in 1981 to work in the Reagan administration for Secretary Mac Baldrige at the Commerce Department. And Malcolm Baldrige was a rodeo cowboy, and that was his hobby. I mean, he was a CEO and he's Secretary of Commerce, but he was a team roper and he would go to rodeos. And he and President Reagan used to, he was sometimes a guest on President Reagan's Wednesday afternoon horseback rides, which he would take when he was in Washington. But one time, Mac Baldrige hosted a rodeo for the president out at the old Capitol Center, which has since been torn down. And he brought in all of the famous rodeo cowboys from the circuit, and they put on a show for the president. And then they had a barbecue on the South Lawn. And that was not the first time, but it's the first time I got to just have a moment with the president where he said, "Oh, thanks for all your help." Just typical, amazingly gracious Ronald Reagan. Um, but he didn't rush it, and he was like, "Boy, you work for a great guy. Do you get to go to many rodeos?" I said, "Well, actually, sir, I do. He brings me along sometimes." He said, "Well, that's great. Cowboys are some of the greatest people." I mean, I just remember it to this day. He just wanted to find a connection and engage, and pretty special.
Fun.
I unfortunately did not have the honor to meet him. I was in the same room with him a couple of times, but that staffer in the corner. I met Mrs. Reagan as a newspaper reporter. I actually covered her when the Reagans went to Moscow in 1987, and USA did for a big summit meeting with Gorbachev. And I was sent to cover Nancy Reagan and Raisa Gorbachev. As you can imagine, that was quite an adventure. If I remember right, I think I irritated Mrs. Reagan. We flew from Moscow to Leningrad. She went to Leningrad for a special visit. Uh, and I think I asked her, she talked to the press on the plane. I can't remember what I asked her, but she didn't like me. But I felt very lucky to be able to cover that trip. And, I sort of feel like I knew President Reagan because President Bush talked about him a lot. And I still remember he took a trip to California to tell him goodbye. He wanted to go make sure he saw him one last time. So,
So you each worked for George H.W. Bush. I asked you earlier what lessons you learned working for him, but what did it mean to each of you to actually be able to spend time with him and work for him?
Well, it's a highlight of certainly my professional life, and like scores and scores of others, as Gene knows so well, I also had the honor of becoming his friend, and it's pretty special. And he was a remarkable gentleman. He cared viscerally about the well-being of his friends and their families, and that's pretty good modeling for life behavior. And we miss him.
Yeah.
it almost seems surreal now. I remember one time we were in the car going somewhere, and President Bush looked at me and he said, "You know what, Gene, sometimes it seems surreal to me that I was president of the United States." He said, it just, I find it almost hard to believe. And he says, "Yes, I remember it, but wow, did that really happen?" That's how I now feel about being his chief of staff for 25 years. He's been gone for 7.5 years. And sometimes it just seems surreal that I got to spend 25 years at his side in his post presidency. And, what a great, great honor. And the reason I keep writing books, Melissa, is because he left me so many great stories to tell. It almost would be criminal not to tell them.
Yeah, love
I
that.
will say one
Go
quick
ahead.
thing about his management style, Melissa. He had a velvet touch, right? But you knew if you'd fallen short on something,
Oh, yeah.
but it truly, you had the feeling in your stomach like you would let your father down. I mean, there was no, rancor. There was no yelling. There was no penalties or whatever. It just you kind of just knew. And that what did that have you do? It made you come back for more and work harder and not have it happen again. So pretty good.
I tell this story all the time, but because we're talking about President Bush and we're talking about advance, it's coming up in my memory so clearly. Years ago, the Reagan Presidential Foundation awarded President Bush, H.W. Bush, our highest award, which is our Freedom Award, and we had before it was presented to him at the event, Mrs. Reagan gave it to him privately in front of the media so that media could have their shot for the evening news. And we had spent the whole day getting the room ready, affixing a presidential seal to the wall, putting up the flags, putting up a rope and stanchion to keep the media away, getting the military member in who's going to present the award to Mrs. Reagan, who will hang it over the president's neck. And everything was perfect and ready to go. And we escort in Mrs. Reagan and President Bush, and they stand in front of the presidential seal, and all the media is taking photos. And we had affixed the presidential seal with Velcro to the wall and then hung it to the ceiling with fishing wire so that it would bear the weight. And just as the media starts taking all the photos, it pulls itself from the wall and it starts swinging. And it hits Mrs. Reagan, and then it hits the president, and then it hits Mrs. Reagan, and then it hits the president. And it was like this audible gasp, and I'm looking around like, who's going to do something, right? And I look at Secret Service, but that's not their job. And so I sneak into the back of the picture and I stick it back up on the wall and I say my apologies and I step back out and the media starts taking photos again. And literally 10 seconds later, it pops itself back off the wall and it swings and it hits Mrs. Reagan and it swings, it hits the president. And so I basically tucked my body behind an American flag and just held it on the wall. So even to this day, if you search the internet for photos, you see my hand in the photo. But the point being, he was so gracious. He smiled and didn't say a word, and I'm still here to tell the story. So, so my last question to you both, as we wrap up, is there a message you'd like readers to take away as they read your book?
One of the things that one of our proofreaders said, it was actually my little brother who read the galley for us and proofread it. There's a lot of history in this book. If you're a history buff, this is a rather interesting way to learn history because you know the story. You know that President Reagan got shot. You know that someone shot at President Ford. There's a wonderful essay by Brian Montgomery about 9/11. There's both funny stories and serious stories. This is truly a peek behind the curtain. And so, read it. It's fun. It's a fun read, and you're going to learn a lot, and it'll just give you an appreciation for, as Tom says, all these unsung heroes.
I couldn't put it any better than that. It's 96 contributors, the arc of 60 years of history, and I'm telling all my friends to have their children read it because they don't want to read the thicker history books, but they'll glean something from it for sure.
Well, yeah, and as
If
I
only
was,
Tom, I'm sorry, I was going to say, if only Tom, we were able to get an essay from John the Baptist, but
well, and I was going to say, and earlier, we were joking about all the life lessons. As I was reading it, I kept thinking college students should read this because there's so many lessons about how to do a job, how to do it well, how to work with people, how to communicate. So, there's a lot of different reasons to read this book. So I think that's a really good way to end, to tell people to go out and purchase Don't Tell the President. It's fun. It's historical. It's an easy read. You can purchase it on our website at reaganlibrary.com/store, or of course Amazon, or anywhere else you buy your books. So thank you so much to Jean and Tom for joining us and spending your morning or afternoon with us wherever you're living right now. And hopefully we see you both again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So much fun.
Thank you, Melissa, very much.
Thank you.